Stand up! Hands behind her back!
I just pulled that kid out of the water.
You saved my life!
You caused a disturbance. He was drowning.
You're interfering with emergency response.
I was the emergency response.
It happened in less than 10 seconds. A child slipped beneath the surface arms, flailing once before disappearing into the dark green water. A sharp scream tore through the lakeside park, cutting through laughter music from a portable speaker, the lazy rhythm of a summer afternoon. He's drowning. People froze. A woman dropped her phone. Someone shouted for help without moving. The water rippled where the child had been, then went still in a way that made panic spread faster than sound. A black man near the shoreline didn't hesitate. He kicked off his shoes and dove in, fully clothed, the impact loud and hollow. Water swallowed him instantly. He surfaced once, eyes scanning, then disappeared again. The crowd leaned forward as one body holding its breath. Seconds stretched. Then he came back up, one arm locked around the child's chest, the other cutting hard through the water. The boy coughed, sputtering alive. Hands reached down from the dock. Someone grabbed the child first, then the man. He collapsed onto the grass. Chest heaving, water pouring from his sleeves. His hands shook from adrenaline, not fear. He rolled onto his side, gasping, eyes fixed on the child now crying in his mother's arms. "You're okay," the man said between breaths. "You're okay." Relief rippled through the crowd. Applause broke out in fragments. Someone shouted, "Thank you." Someone else wiped their eyes. That was when the sirens arrived. A patrol car skidded to a stop near the park entrance. A uniformed officer stepped out quickly, hand already resting on his belt. His eyes swept the scene, the wet clothes, the crowd, the crying child, the man on the ground. "You," the officer said, pointing. "Stand up." The man pushed himself to his knees, still coughing. "I just pulled him out of the water." The officer didn't respond. He stepped closer, scanning the man up and down. "Why were you in the water?" "To save him," a woman shouted from the crowd. "He saved my son." The officer raised a hand without turning around. "Ma'am, step back." The man stood slowly, water dripping onto the pavement. His voice was hoarse but calm. "Sir, the kid went under. I saw it happen." The officer's eyes narrowed. "We've had reports of disturbances here today." "What disturbance?" the man asked. "You jumping into the lake," the officer said, causing a scene. The crowd murmured, confused now, uneasy. "He was drowning," the mother said. "He couldn't breathe." The officer finally looked at her, then back at the man. "I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." The man blinked. "For what?" "For interfering with emergency response." The man let out a short, incredulous breath. "I am the emergency response." The officer stepped in closer. "Hands behind your back, now." Water still ran from the man's clothes. His heart was still racing from the rescue, from the weight of a child in his arms, from the muscle memory that never really left him. He looked around at the faces, watching, some shocked, some recording, some suddenly silent. He did what he was told. Metal closed around his wrists. Click. The child he had saved watched from his mother's arms, wide-eyed, as the man who pulled him from the water was led away in handcuffs. And no one there yet knew why that man had jumped in without thinking, or what that decision was about to cost the city. The man who dove into the lake had learned long ago not to wait for permission. His name was Daniel Brooks, 41 years old, retired Army Staff Sergeant. He woke up every morning at 5 a.m. out of habit, even years after leaving the service. His body never forgot schedules written into muscle and bone. Discipline was not something he turned on. It was something that stayed. Daniel had served 2 tours overseas, the first in Fallujah, the second in Kandahar. He had carried wounded soldiers through smoke thick enough to choke thought. He had pulled men from overturned vehicles while rounds cracked overhead. He had learned how panic sounded, how drowning looked, how seconds mattered more than instructions. The Purple Heart sat in a small wooden box in his bedroom drawer. He did not display it. Most people in his life didn't know it existed. When his daughter once asked why he kept it hidden, he told her medals were reminders, not decorations. Reminders of friends who didn't come home. Reminders of decisions made in moments with no rewind. Daniel lived quietly now. Worked maintenance for the city parks department, fixed benches, repaired docks, checked water safety lines. He liked the work because it was simple and tangible. Something broken could be made functional again. That afternoon at the lake, he wasn't there as a hero. He was there because it was his day off and his niece wanted to feed ducks. He wore cargo shorts and a faded gray t-shirt, no uniform, no insignia, nothing that suggested authority. When he heard the splash that wasn't playful, his body moved before his mind did. That reflex had been drilled into him under gunfire. The officer who arrived saw none of that. He saw a large black man soaking wet adrenaline high surrounded by a crowd. He saw chaos that needed to be controlled. And he had been trained that control meant commands first, questions later. The officer had been on the force 7 years. No military background. His experience with emergencies came from calls, not combat. Drownings made him uneasy. Crowds made him uneasy. Situations where the narrative wasn't clear made him default to authority. His radio crackled with partial information. Child in distress? Crowd gathered. Unknown male involved. Unknown became suspicious quickly. He did not ask witnesses what happened. He did not assess the child's condition beyond noting that paramedics were already en route. He focused on the variable that stood out to him. The man who jumped in. From the officer's perspective, he needed to secure the scene. Secure meant restrain. Restrain meant cuffs. Training took over where curiosity should have been. From Daniel's perspective, this was a different kind of battlefield. His lungs still burned from lake water. His hands shook not from fear, but from the familiar chemical dump that followed action. His ears rang slightly the way they always did after a rush. When the officer ordered him to turn around, Daniel complied without protest. Not because he believed it was right, because he had learned what arguing in the wrong moment could cost. As the cuffs closed, Daniel stared at the water where the child had gone under. The surface was calm now. Deceptively calm. He wondered if the boy would remember any of it, or if the memory would fade into a story his parents told later. What Daniel did not wonder was whether he would jump in again. He would, every time, because saving lives had never required permission before, and it had never come with handcuffs. The crowd did not disperse when the cuffs went on. It leaned in. Phones were up, now held at eye level, no longer pretending to be discreet. A man near the picnic table said, "He just saved that kid." A woman closer to the water added, "I saw the whole thing." He jumped in before anyone else moved. The officer did not acknowledge them. He guided Daniel toward the patrol car, one hand firm on his upper arm. Daniel's wet shirt clung to his skin. Water dripped onto the gravel with each step, leaving a trail behind him like evidence no one was cataloging. "Sir," the child's father said, voice shaking. "That man pulled my son out. He was underwater. He would have died." The officer finally turned. "Sir, please step back. This is an active situation." Active how, the father asked. "My kid is alive because of him." Another voice cut in. "You're arresting the wrong person." The officer's jaw tightened. He keyed his radio. "I need backup at the lake." Crowd getting agitated. Agitated was not the word. Confused, angry, disoriented, that was closer. Daniel tried to turn his head. "Officer, the paramedics haven't even checked me yet." I swallowed water. "You'll get medical attention at the station," the officer replied. "At the station," Daniel repeated. His voice stayed even. He knew better than to let frustration show. "Sir, multiple witnesses can tell you exactly what happened." "I don't need a play-by-play from you," the officer said. "I need you to comply." "I am complying." The officer stopped walking and faced him fully now. Then, "Stop talking." The crowd reacted to that. Not loudly. Not all at once. A low wave of disbelief moved through people who had just watched a man do something brave and selfless and were now being told to accept that it was suspicious. A teenager whispered, "This is messed up." A woman holding a towel for the rescued child began crying again, this time not from relief. Daniel caught the child's eyes again as they passed. The boy was wrapped in a blanket now, cheeks flushed, breathing fast but steady. He looked at Daniel with something like confusion, like he was trying to understand why the person who helped him was being taken away. Daniel gave him a small nod. "You're okay." The patrol car door opened. As Daniel was guided inside, someone shouted his name. He didn't know who. He didn't look back. The officer closed the door harder than necessary. Inside the car, the air smelled like plastic and disinfectant. Daniel sat upright, cuffs biting into his wrists as the car idled. Outside, the officer spoke briefly with another unit that had arrived. Words like protocol and safety floated through the open window. No one mentioned gratitude. No one mentioned heroism. The narrative had shifted, and it was moving fast. From rescue to restraint. From witness to suspect. And the crowd, once united by relief, now stood divided between those who kept filming and those who looked away. Suddenly aware that stepping in had a cost. As the car pulled away, Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Not in defeat, in focus, because he knew something the officer did not. This story was already being told by dozens of lenses, and it would not end at the lake. The injustice did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with routine. At the station, Daniel was guided out of the patrol car and into fluorescent light that felt harsher than the sun at the lake. His clothes were still wet. Water pooled briefly on the concrete floor before spreading thin and disappearing unnoticed. An officer at the desk looked up. "What do we have?" "Interfering with emergency response," the arresting officer said. "Possible disorderly conduct." Daniel listened without reacting. His breathing was steady now. The adrenaline had begun to fade, leaving behind a dull ache in his shoulders and a familiar tightness in his chest. He recognized it. Post-action. The body coming down from urgency. "I saved a child from drowning," Daniel said calmly. "There are witnesses." The desk officer typed, didn't look at him, hands still cuffed. Daniel was led down a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. Doors closed softly as they passed. No one raised their voice. No one asked follow-up questions. That was what made it worse. In a small processing room, Daniel was told to sit. The metal bench was cold through his soaked shorts. His wrists burned where the cuffs pressed against skin already tender from lake water. An officer approached with gloves. "Any weapons on you?" "No." "Any medical conditions?" "I swallowed water. I need to be checked." The officer nodded absently and continued filling out a form. A camera clicked. Once. Then again. Daniel stared straight ahead. He had stood for photographs before. Some taken in uniform, some taken beside men who did not survive long enough to see theirs printed. This one felt different. This one erased context. The arresting officer stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. His face showed no satisfaction, no anger, just rigidity. Commitment to a decision already made. Daniel finally looked at him. "Officer, you saw the child breathing when you arrived. You saw the crowd. You heard them." The officer said nothing. Daniel looked away again. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes chosen, not accidental. Minutes passed, then more. A medic eventually arrived, checked Daniel's vitals, quickly cleared him with minimal attention. The paperwork continued. In another room, the child was being checked by paramedics. The parents were answering questions. Their voices carried faintly through the walls. Gratitude, relief, confusion. None of it reached Daniel. Instead, a fingerprint scanner was placed in front of him. Ink pressed into lines he had once used to grip a rifle to pull wounded men from debris to hold a child above water. The system reduced all of that to a pattern. The cuffs finally came off, not with apology, with procedure. Daniel flexed his hands slowly. Red marks circled his wrists like evidence he did not need documented. As he was escorted to a holding area, Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not anger, disbelief. He had faced enemy fire without hesitation. He had followed orders that cost lives and saved others. He had been trained to accept consequences. But this was punishment without cause. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake. The water reflected gold and orange, peaceful and different. Inside, a man who had acted on instinct to save a life sat on a bench waiting to be treated like a problem that needed solving. And the system once again mistook control for justice. The shift did not happen loudly. It began with a pause. A senior sergeant stepped into the processing area carrying a thin folder. He did not look at Daniel at first. He looked at the arresting officer. "Whose arrest is this?" "Mine," the officer said. "For what charge?" "Interfering with emergency response." The sergeant nodded slowly. Then he opened the folder. He had already made calls. Witness statements from the lake were logged. Multiple. Consistent. Time-stamped. Video links attached. The footage showed the child slipping under. It showed Daniel entering the water before anyone else moved. It showed the child being pulled out alive. The sergeant finally looked at Daniel. "Sir, is your name Daniel Brooks?" "Yes." "Former Army?" "Yes." The room felt smaller. The sergeant flipped another page. He did not rush. Service record confirmed. 2 tours. Medically retired. Purple Heart recipient. The arresting officer straightened. His expression shifted not into apology, but into calculation. Purple Heart. The words landed heavier than they sounded. Not because of the medal itself, but because of what it meant. Verified courage. Documented sacrifice. A record that did not rely on instinct or assumption. The sergeant closed the folder. "Officer, step outside with me." The door shut behind them. Daniel sat alone. He stared at the wall across from him. The paint was chipped near the corner. He focused on it the way he once focused on maps. On small details to stay grounded. Voices carried faintly through the door. Low, controlled, the tone of damage assessment. Minutes later, the door opened again. The sergeant returned. His posture was different now, less procedural, more deliberate. "Mr. Brooks, you are being released." Daniel looked up. "On what basis?" "No charges will be filed." Daniel nodded once. He did not smile. The sergeant continued. "Sir, I want to be clear. What you did at the lake saved a life. That is not in dispute." Daniel listened. The arresting officer remained outside. The sergeant hesitated, then spoke again. Your service record should have been considered sooner. That did not happen. Daniel's voice was quiet. My service record had nothing to do with saving that child. The sergeant held his gaze. You're right. The paperwork slid across the desk. Release forms. No apology written anywhere, just signatures. As Daniel stood, another officer entered. Younger, unsure. He handed Daniel a small plastic bag with his belongings. Wallet, keys, phone. The phone buzzed immediately. Missed calls, messages, videos already circulating. Daniel did not check them yet. As he walked out of the station, the evening air hit his face. Cooler than the lake, sharper, real. Across the lot, the parents of the rescued child were waiting. The mother stepped forward first. Thank you, she said. Again. Daniel nodded. That was enough. Behind them, inside the building, paperwork was already being rewritten, because the truth had surfaced, not through assumptions, but through records. And the moment the system realized who Daniel Brooks was on paper, it was forced to confront what it had done in reality. The lawsuit was not an emotional reaction. It was methodical. Filed 9 days after Daniel Brooks walked out of the station, it named the officer individually and the city collectively. Federal court, civil rights violations, false arrest, excessive use of force, failure to investigate before restraint, retaliatory detention after lawful life-saving action, $7.8 million, not as a demand, as a valuation of harm. By then, the videos had already done what filings could not. Multiple angles showed the rescue. The moment the child went under, Daniel entering the water, the crowd pulling both of them out, and then unmistakably the cuffs. National media picked it up within 48 hours. Headlines did not debate what happened. They stated it. Black veteran arrested after saving drowning child. Purple Heart recipient detained while crowd protests. Veterans groups reacted immediately. Statements, letters, organized pressure. The phrase, "This is unacceptable," appeared again and again, not as outrage but as consensus. The police department placed the officer on unpaid leave. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation. Not the quiet kind, the kind that required interviews under oath. The findings were clear. No probable cause, no exigent threat, no attempt to identify witnesses before arrest, no medical evaluation prior to restraint. Training failures were documented, supervisory oversight questioned. The officer's prior record was reviewed with a different lens this time. Past complaints re-examined. Patterns that had once been explained away now sat in plain view. The city's legal team advised settlement early. They had no defense that could survive the footage. Negotiations took 3 weeks. The final number did not change. $7.8 million. The officer was terminated 2 months later. His certification flagged. His appeal denied. The department cited loss of public trust and gross deviation from protocol. The city announced reforms, mandatory life-saving scene protocols, witness first assessment, de-escalation requirements even in chaotic environments. Press conferences were held. Promises were made. Daniel Brooks did not attend. He returned to work quietly. Fixed docks, replaced warning signs near the water, installed a new life ring at the spot where the child had gone under. He declined interviews, declined appearances, declined praise. When asked once why he pursued the lawsuit, his answer was brief. Because next time it might be someone without witnesses, without medals, without a record anyone respects. The city paid the money. The officer lost his badge. And a moment that should have ended with gratitude became a case study in how quickly heroism can be criminalized when assumptions outrun facts. What happened at the lake exposes a misunderstanding that repeats itself across the country. Saving a life is not suspicious behavior. It is a protected act. Under both state Good Samaritan laws and long-established Fourth Amendment doctrine, a person who intervenes to prevent imminent harm cannot be lawfully detained without clear, articulable evidence of wrongdoing. None existed here. Reasonable suspicion requires facts, not discomfort. It requires observation tied to conduct that suggests a crime. Entering water to rescue a drowning child is the opposite of criminal intent. Arresting first and investigating later violates constitutional safeguards designed precisely to prevent this kind of outcome. The use of handcuffs matters. Handcuffing is not neutral. It is a physical restraint and a psychological escalation. Courts have repeatedly held that restraints must be justified by flight risk, danger, or resistance. Daniel Brooks was exhausted, compliant, and surrounded by witnesses confirming his actions. The restraint was not protective. It was punitive. This case also highlights how authority reacts under uncertainty. Crowded scenes make some officers default to control rather than clarity. When adrenaline rises, Bias fills informational gaps. Instead of asking who helped the system, asked who to contain. That reflex turns heroes into suspects and fractures public trust in seconds. For civilians, the lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Intervening to save a life is morally right. It can also place you at risk of scrutiny. Documentation protects you. Witnesses protect you. Calm compliance protects you in the moment, even when the moment is unjust. For officers, the lesson is sharper. Scene control does not excuse failure to assess. Authority does not replace investigation. When the first instinct is restraint instead of recognition, the badge stops serving the public and starts endangering it. For communities, the lesson is collective. Cameras matter, voices matter, consistent witness accounts matter. Accountability does not emerge from silence. It emerges from records that cannot be ignored. Daniel Brooks did not need a medal to justify saving a child. The law already did that. The tragedy is that the system only corrected itself once his record forced recognition. Justice should not require credentials, uniform service, or national honor. It should require only the truth. And the truth this time was undeniable.